bit about a couple of topics that I find interesting in Bitcoin today, and I want to make this interactive. Since I'm here, you can interrupt me as much as you want. We'll do some Q&A while I'm talking and keep it interactive. So the first topic I want to talk about is Bitcoin neutrality. And together with that, I want to talk about resetting our expectations as to the trajectory of Bitcoin. So first of all, Bitcoin neutrality, what does that mean? My theory is that the most important characteristics, the greatest features of Bitcoin, come from the fact that at the fundamental level, it is a protocol that is neutral. Neutral to sender, neutral to recipient, neutral as to the content of a transaction. We've had a network like that before. It's IP, and it worked pretty well because it was neutral. The dump pipe approach of the internet allowed us to do innovation at the edges. Innovation without permission, and innovation without changing the underlying protocol. So that's already happening on Bitcoin. And if you think about it carefully, all of the interesting things that Bitcoin is able to do actually derive from this core principle of neutrality. Yeah, it is. If you look at Bitcoin not as a coin, but as a protocol, as a network, as an open standard, the core blockchain technology is a bit like the internet protocol. It is a base address-to-address system. Essentially, it's a layer 3 protocol. And on top of that, we're already building applications. Currency is only the first application that we're building on top of the Bitcoin protocol. If you've studied some of the things that are coming along like Mastercoin, you'll find that they're doing some rather interesting things with the protocol to elevate it a couple of layers up. So if blockchain is IP, then within each transaction, the script that's used inside the transaction is the transport control protocol, it's TCP. The transactions allow you to specify the content of the transaction as it's stored on the blockchain. And with a couple of neat tricks, Mastercoin, by assigning special addresses, has able to take it one layer above. Kind of like port 80 or HTTP, creating another layer of protocols above the basic capability of Bitcoin. Why does all this matter? It matters because Bitcoin is not a coin, and Bitcoin is not a currency. And we're going to spend the next 10 years fixing the basic mistake of naming it Bitcoin. Because all of the words are wrong. We don't have wallets. We don't really use keys, not in the way we consider them in terms of cryptography. And there are no coins. So it's a very poorly named system. I would have preferred if we called it MoneyNet. That would have been the inter-MoneyNet. That would be more accurate because already we have, as new people come into this currency, we have to explain to them why Bitcoin is so much more important than just a coin because it's not a coin. And we haven't even started, so that's a lot of explaining to do. So Bitcoin neutrality is extremely important because all of the capabilities that are built on top of Bitcoin depend on the protocol being completely neutral to sender and recipient. Robert G. Brown, an IBM analyst, coined a nice little phrase, which is, on the blockchain, nobody knows your fridge. And this is a really important insight because just like the internet, it speaks to the ability to innovate without permission. It speaks to a fundamental separation of identity and asset ownership. And on top of that, we can build a lot because that core principle allows us to have a flexible network that provides a layer that is transparent to the layers above, and on top of which we can build a lot more than just once. So Bitcoin is the first app. Currency is the first app on the Bitcoin network. We have barely started. When I read about Bitcoin in the popular press, a common metaphor is that Bitcoin is like the internet in 1995. And I was on the internet in 1989, and I can tell you, Bitcoin is not like the internet in 95. Bitcoin is like the internet in 1991. We don't have a killer app yet. We don't have DNS yet. We don't have web yet. We're going around with lists of IP addresses in our wallet and using Archie, Gopher, and Usenet as the killer applications. That's what we are in terms of Bitcoin. We're still in the obscure, geeky, awkward phase. And that's fine, because that means we have a lot of work to do before we can show this to consumers. There's a really interesting video going around showing a Morning in America, I think, discussion about the internet in 1994. And you have these three bewildered editors spending about 15 minutes trying to decide whether the @ sign is pronounced at or about, if it's an email or the internet, and what the hell this .com thing at the end is. And this is in 1994. So relax, we've got plenty of time. This thing isn't going mainstream until we fix a few basic problems. But here are the lessons we can learn from the internet and apply them to Bitcoin. And the first thing is that this neutrality that's built into the core protocol will be attacked. And it will be attacked almost immediately by everyone building things on the layer above who wants to apply control. The internet started as an any-20 network. It's not that much of an any-20 network today. Unfortunately, the core principle of neutrality has been massively diluted, and we are at risk of losing it. And I want to caution you all because the exact same thing is going to happen to Bitcoin. So what does it mean for Bitcoin to not be neutral? For Bitcoin to not be neutral, it means that suddenly the protocol starts caring about who the sender is, or who the destination is, or what the content of their transaction is. And if we allow that process to start, it's going to ruin Bitcoin for all of us. So pay attention. Pay attention to the critical signs. Most important thing to notice is that when they come to take away your Bitcoin neutrality, they're not going to phrase it in terms of breaking Bitcoin. They're going to phrase it in terms of fixing Bitcoin, making it harder to steal Bitcoin, making it easier to reverse theft of Bitcoin, making it easier to stop criminals from using Bitcoin by using filtering on addresses. Resist. We cannot allow them to break Bitcoin neutrality, because if they break Bitcoin neutrality, the system, the network, the currency devolves into being just another fiat. And I don't want that to happen because Bitcoin is just not another fiat. Bitcoin isn't the 193rd currency in the world. Bitcoin is the first supranational currency, and we've never done that before. So the second part of my talk, if you understand the importance of neutrality and understand why we should keep neutrality, is to adjust your expectations. I think we have some expectations of Bitcoin that need to be adjusted, and adjusted in a more aggressive manner. So in the last few weeks, something remarkable happened. BTC China went from a low percentage of the total volume to doing somewhere between 80 and 90,000 Bitcoin a day, which put it at about 50 to 55% of global volume. That is hugely significant. Basically, the geographic center of Bitcoin just shifted 15,000 miles to the east and landed somewhere in the middle of Southeast Asia, which also happens to be the place where 3.5 billion people live, in that one corner, right? And so the reason I'm saying you should reset your expectations is because we've built Bitcoin as a fad. We've built it and we've developed it most here in Silicon Valley, where there is no social or political problem that we don't think we can solve with technology. An assumption that is full of hubris and audacity, but also necessary for innovation. So it kind of works. But it's no longer about us. It's no longer about white, male, English-speaking users of Bitcoin. As of 4 weeks ago, the average Bitcoin user shifted to being a 20-year-old Han-Chinese man. And that's a great thing. Right? That's a really important step in the development of this currency. So if you look at Bitcoin and you think, well, this is going to play out over the next 10 to 15 years, reset your expectations. Bitcoin is going to play out over the next 3 years. It will either die in those 3 years, or it will survive. And if it survives, it will explode across the globe. It will explode across the globe in these little explosions of adoption that will happen in different countries as people see the relative utility of a supranational currency completely beats their own. And it will happen here last. Why? because we got it good. We have the only world reserve currency. And that's a really great thing to have. But there are 191 other places that don't have the world reserve currency. And whether their currency sucks, as it does in so many countries, whether their government sucks or their political system sucks and they see Bitcoin as a possible solution, or whether they recognize that perhaps a world reserve currency that's controlled by math and not people is a better proposition. Either way, we're going to start seeing movements of national adoption. China was the first. What's really significant about understanding China is that this was not an accident. This was not a coincidence. If you've been paying attention over the last 4 months, there have been 4 documentaries on Chinese TV talking about Bitcoin. So, if you think about it from our perspective, you think, great, they went out, they saw a good story, someone called their editor and said, hey, let's talk about Bitcoin. And that went up the chain until someone on Chinese TV said, that sounds like a good topic, let's put it on the air. That's not how things happen in China. It pretty much went exactly the opposite way. Someone at the top of the political system said, well, there's one world reserve currency and it belongs to our greatest competitor. And there's this other thing that's based on math. And we could use it to poke them in the eye. Start playing documentaries, please. And that's what happened. If you get a documentary on Chinese TV, it is not despite the leadership. It is because and entirely endorsed by the leadership. This is a political move, and it is a very important political move because it means that China is now beginning to bet that Bitcoin will have less of a disruptive influence within China and more of a disruptive influence to the global reserve currency status of the US dollar. There are 191 other countries that might make the same calculation. And guess what? They all have the same game theory in mind, which says if we have one currency that's controlled by people and one supranational currency that's not controlled by anyone, the supranational one is better. Yes?
So if you follow your narrative,
yes,
that would say that the government of the United States is going to do everything in its power to destroy Bitcoin because it's a national security issue given our balance of debt.
Will the United States government do everything in its power to destroy Bitcoin? At first, yes. So we're in an interesting situation right now, which is the ones who understand what's going on are terrified, and the ones who are not yet terrified don't quite understand what's going on, but will soon be terrified. Because if you are the type of bank or government that funds your entire existence through war, and debt issuance, and fraud, and rent-seeking, and controlling the flows of money, then the currency that you can't control is anathema. So absolutely, this is becoming a very serious strategic game now. But it doesn't matter. Cat's out of the bag. Bitcoin is unstoppable. Externalities cannot stop Bitcoin. Right now, the only scenario that could result in Bitcoin failure would be a long-running bug that reveals keys in a way we don't notice, and don't notice for a long time. That could destroy Bitcoin. Take the Android secure random implementation that revealed a few dozen keys because it used improper initialization of a random number generator. If that had gone on for a year, unnoticed, and compromised 60–70% of the keys on the blockchain, that would kill Bitcoin. That can kill Bitcoin. Absent of that, however, there are very few forces that can stop a currency that has now gone global. So, just at the same time that the American government perhaps does become worried about this, it's too late because China happened. Yes.
Do you think that people who purchase Bitcoin feel like Coinbase or other exchanges that with you personally as an individual, that these individuals are going to be targeted?
Do I think that individuals purchasing Bitcoin are going to be targeted? Absolutely not. No. I think the type of pressure you're going to see is going to be much more subtle than that. And it's only going to come through the traditional banking and banking regulation system. I don't think consumers of Bitcoin have anything to fear at all. I'm not taking in data across borders and I'm keeping my nose clean because I have a public profile, but other than a handful of people who have a public profile of Bitcoin, nobody has to worry about Bitcoin being illicit. Not here. In fact, a legal fight against Bitcoin is extremely unlikely at that level, and the reason is because it's very likely that they might lose such a legal fight. There are certain principles in the First Amendment that would allow you to use a currency of your choice. And that's a precedent they don't want to lose, because losing that then establishes firmly and legally the right to own a currency. Much better to keep it gray for now. Another question? Yes?
Just to second your observation on China, Russia appears to be in a fairly similar situation where Russia today, Max Kaiser seems to be very pro-Bitcoin and
right, so Russia Today has now done hours, and I've been on Russia Today 4 times talking about Bitcoin, and I've only been on U.S. television stations once or twice. It's a very different environment, and again, it is cynical, calculated, political, nasty, and it works in our favor, so I'll take it.
Yep. And Russian PayPal what money, and they do accept the Bitcoin, so you can exchange it.
So let's talk a bit about international adoption, because this has a lot to do with network neutrality. There's this weird assumption that we're going to adopt Bitcoin here first. Why? Because we have the technology, because we're modern, enlightened people who are the cutting edge of technology. We live in the Silicon Valley after all, we must be enlightened. So we're going to adopt Bitcoin first, and it's going to start here. And that assumption is entirely wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because there are 4 basic preconditions to adopting Bitcoin, and while we have all of them, we lack the most important, which is incentive. So the first one is the marginal utility of Bitcoin versus your local currency. The second one is that Bitcoin is neutral towards your religion, language, and culture. Right? You can't adopt something that offends your religion, and that's pretty good. We actually, Bitcoin is Sharia compatible. It's compatible with the Jewish religion and the celebration of the Sabbath. You can use Bitcoin in certain ways to be compatible with most any culture. The third precondition is infrastructure, and that starts with electricity, not internet, but electricity and smartphones and various other things. And the fourth thing is fear, right? If I hold Bitcoin in North Korea, I die. So I'm not going to adopt Bitcoin in North Korea. So you have to find that special tipping point where the marginal utility of the currency is great enough, the infrastructure is there, it's not offensive to your culture, and you're not terrified you're going to get shot for owning Bitcoin. And while we may think that those things are strong here, the most important one, which is marginal utility versus your currency, is completely missing. Bitcoin is not better than the US dollar. Sorry to say, it's not. It might be in 5 years, without a doubt. It's on a trajectory that's going to overtake the US dollar. But if you were to stack rank 191 national currencies in terms of utility, value, attractiveness, Bitcoin probably beats 50 or 60 of them right off the bat. But the US dollar is at the top. You can use it in any country in the world. It has value because everybody holds their reserves in it. It's accepted by everyone, everywhere. You don't have to convert dollars into foreign currency when you travel, right? No other country gets to do that. You can't just show up in somebody else's country and say, hey, this is nice, this Florida Disneyland you have here. I have Canadian money. Will you take it? No, they won't. But if you show up in the middle of, I don't know, Hungary, in Budapest as I did, with dollars, they'll take them. They'll take them at 3 times face value. So the point being, dollars do not win. Or rather, Bitcoin does not win over dollars. So there's 190 other countries. And for most of those countries, the people who live there are accustomed to a very different financial situation than we are. Their government regularly steals their money, regularly inflates their currency into nothing. And they're also comfortable using multiple currencies. They're comfortable with legal uncertainty. Frankly, they're comfortable with bribing the officials they need to bribe to get around problems. I've lived like that in Eastern Europe And it's a normal part of life. By the age of 14, I knew how to exchange money on the black market, right? Tell me how many Americans know how to exchange money on the black market. See, that is an adoption accelerator right there. You have a question?
Yeah, so China has one of the biggest US dollars reserves.
China has the biggest US dollar reserves.
So why would China be pushing for Bitcoin?
Because they have to have those dollar reserves in order to buy oil. And if they could avoid having those dollar reserves, they would. Quite honestly, because it costs them geopolitically far more than it's worth in terms of money. So the problem is that China has to use a currency in order for practical reasons, but for strategic reasons, their use of that currency underpins your lifestyle. And without their use of that currency, bye-bye American lifestyle. We simply can't afford it. Yes?
You said that Bitcoin would be adopted last year in the U.S. because we're the world's reserve currency.
It might be adopted, but it will not knock the dollar off its pedestal anytime soon.
But one thing that Bitcoin is very good at is allowing you to move funds across international borders freely and at very fine granularity without getting caught with taxes or other types of uncomfortable speed bumps. If that were true to a much wider scale than it is today, then you think that would accelerate adoption here?
It will accelerate adoption here. So what we will see in the U.S. is outside-in adoption. What we will see is U.S. companies using Bitcoin to interact with their international partners because they have adopted Bitcoin faster than you'll see it here. Honestly, I do think that's going to be the case. Already, the regulatory environment is highly hostile. The banking environment is very difficult. So you need these compelling reasons. Otherwise, Bitcoin is just a fad to us. From a business perspective, unless you're investing in it as an entrepreneur, it doesn't really make sense. And forget the cupcake company that says we take Bitcoin and gets 1 million people in a Washington Post write-off. You can only do that in the first year. Afterwards, you can't really accelerate that adoption without having a compelling advantage. So let me talk about what the two major applications of Bitcoin as a currency are today. The two killer applications are two massive flows of international money. The first one is foreign remittances, and the second one is capital flight. And in order to understand how Bitcoin is adopted, you need to understand how those two need to balance each other out. If we try to start using Bitcoin to send money from here to other countries, essentially replacing Western Union and allowing itinerant and migrant workers to send money home, the problem is you'd run out of Bitcoin buyers on the other end pretty quickly. What you need is people willing to buy large amounts of Bitcoin, and fortunately they exist. They're the rich running away. So what you do is for every 10,000 migrants on this end, you find one rich person on the other end who's trying to run away from currency controls. And those two flows balance out. If we start those flows up in a couple of different countries, you will see Bitcoin accelerate beyond what we can even imagine right now. 3 weeks. And almost all of that has to do with international adoption of Bitcoin. It is accelerating like we cannot imagine. So it's already not about us. You had a question?
Yeah. First off, great summary, great analysis of some of the geopolitical reasons, some of the geopolitical issues, I guess, surrounding Bitcoin. So what are your thoughts on Bitcoin becoming, so right now we're obviously a very speculative currency, it's a very speculative thing, and it maybe soon becomes a store of value of some sort. What are your thoughts on legitimacy of Bitcoin becoming a transactional currency, and what do you see some of the hurdles are? Because Bitcoin now, obviously, wouldn't function very well, even if all the infrastructure for a transactional currency existed.
Bitcoin now functions as well as Usenet before DNS functions. It was better than everything that came before, but it was nowhere near where it needed to be for consumer adoption. We have a long way to go for that. But in terms of legitimacy, quite honestly, I don't give a damn. I do not give a damn about legitimacy of Bitcoin in the eyes of anyone. Because Bitcoin doesn't need legitimacy. Bitcoin is a solution to an actual problem. And it works. And it is unstoppable technologically. So we don't need permission. from anyone. And if we are worried about legitimacy here, you have to realize that in many countries it's a much bigger problem, and yet they're not worried too much about it. So I think that's very much a preoccupation in the American environment.
Yeah, great point. Maybe legitimacy is the wrong word to use, but I would say maybe the utility of Bitcoin as a transactional currency. I mean,
so at the moment, yes, that's a very good point. So
Right.
Bitcoin as a currency has two aspects. One is as a transactional or exchange mechanism, exchange value, and the other one is a store of value. Today, Bitcoin is used almost entirely as an exchange of value for those using it for payments, and it's used as a speculative instrument which isn't a store of value. It is a wild casino ride for those who are interested in speculation. As an exchange of value, Bitcoin is poor at the moment, and part of the reason that it's poor, there's two issues. One is the exchange rate, and the other one is the volatility among international currencies. I mean, you can't even get a clear price. How much is Bitcoin today? Yeah. Well, let's ask 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different exchanges, and then notice the spread, right? 386 at the top, 330 at the bottom, right? That's a $56 spread. It's ridiculous. Right, so why do we have a $56 spread? Well, as always, it's fiat's fault. Bitcoin's working fine. If you wanted to do arbitrage between these exchanges, you could easily move Bitcoin. And in fact, during the big run-up, what we saw is the gap between Mt. Gox and Coinbase shrunk to almost nothing, because as soon as Coinbase price got closer, people started moving Bitcoin out to Mt. Gox, and a lot of the US dollar hangover had already gone. Now it's increasing again. What this represents is not a difficulty in Bitcoin, but a difficulty in moving dollars between these exchanges.
And other currencies.
And other currencies, but primarily dollars.
Yeah.
You don't see these kinds of spreads in the other currencies. They're much narrower if you switch to one of the others. So at the moment, if you want to use Bitcoin transactionally, you have to hold it like a hot potato for the minimum amount of time you can to minimize the exposure to volatility in the exchange rate. I pay contractors, I managed to persuade people in Bangalore and Kerala and various other places who are contractors to accept Bitcoin. It was a difficult conversation. They have a long history. And in their history, every time a white man came to them and tried to show them a new type of currency, it was usually crappy beads. And they usually had smallpox on them. So you can imagine the type of response you get when you go to a contractor and say, hey, I got fake money. You want fake money? They look at you and they say, yeah, white boy, that's been tried before, and we still remember, especially in India, and I'm half British, so I have to tread carefully. Anyway, the trick was, once I was able to persuade someone to take a bonus payment, not their main payment, a bonus payment, because then they didn't have anything to lose, and got them to convert it to local Bitcoins on the other end, what they realized is that instead of paying a 5% fee to PayPal, they made the 5% premium on local Bitcoins. Just like that, the conversation changed. And so these types of little tipping points are going to happen all over the world. So when I was saying reset your expectations, another thing I think we need to understand is that humans don't think on a linear scale. Sorry, don't think on a linear scale. They don't think on a logarithmic scale. We have great difficulty appreciating exponential growth in any technology, in any aspect of life. We don't realize what happens when you add exponential growth. Our brain is unable to extrapolate that way, at least not intuitively. Bitcoin doesn't have a linear growth model. It simply does not have such a growth model. It has two growth models. One, it dies because of a horrible bug or something like that. At which point, 1,000 altcoins rush in to fill the gap, and we reboot and start again with a new name. Not such a bad thing to happen. A lot of people are going to get burned, but the main technology isn't going anywhere. Scenario number two, Bitcoin survives. And by surviving, it thrives. And in that scenario, we're looking at very significant adoption within the next 2 to 3 years. This isn't a 10-year game. when the Bitcoin bosses say 400 billion valuation is not out of the question, I think they're being conservative. Because we keep thinking of it as a stock, and our brain can't wrap around the idea of, okay, it's 367 down. Have you ever bought a stock for $100,000? Anybody here? Have you ever seen a stock listed for $100,000?
Yeah. Berkshire has BRK Berkshire.
Okay, most don't do that. Why not?
They're split.
They split, exactly. Because there's a psychological barrier to high prices in stocks, right? So if you're an outlier, a couple of orders of magnitude above all the other stock prices, people don't buy you just because of the psychological factor. Unless you're Berkshire Hathaway, that's one exception. But we can't do stock splits. We can only do division with Bitcoin. So if you think of it from that perspective, $100,000 Bitcoin is not at all weird. It is absolutely doable because we're not going to split. We're just going to keep going. The important thing is to realize at $4 billion valuation, Bitcoin is a smallish stock and a piddly currency. 4 billion is not a monetary base for a currency. 4 billion is a monetary base for a penny stock. We have a long way to go. So a 400 billion valuation for the first supranational currency that actually helps fulfill certain strategic goals of some of the richest nations on earth? Easy. Unless, of course, we die on the way there. So those are the two scenarios. Either Bitcoin collapses in a spectacular crash, primarily because of an internal bot, not an external situation, or it becomes a currency. And as the first supranational currency, its valuation cannot be any less than $400 billion. It doesn't make sense. So when the Bitcoin bosses say that, I think conservative. I have been consistently trying to reset my expectations as to the trajectory of Bitcoin. And the reason for that is because we have no historical parallel to this. And that's very important to understand. We've never done this before. Not only this has never been done in the history of humanity. And so if we do it, it's all new. We don't have the analytical tools to look at Bitcoin as a stock because it's not a stock. It is an asset class. What type of asset class? A cryptocurrency asset class. And how do cryptocurrency asset classes behave? I have no clue. Give me 2 years, I'll answer it then. We don't know yet. Yes?
So one of the biggest things that's happening with governments, and it is exactly what you're saying, is that right now there's a form of capital controls within the United States. If I want to transfer more than $10,000 out of the United States and keep more than $10,000 in a foreign bank account, that's a problem for a U.S. citizen.
Yes, if you have more than 10,000 and tries to transfer more than 10,000, you're going to run into problems.
Bitcoin avoids that problem. So,
Yes, it does.
So, and there are various other forces out there that are saying that Bitcoin needs to be regulated. Where do you see that happening?
I think all of those forces will continue to say that Bitcoin needs to be regulated. And they will be as successful in regulating Bitcoin as they have been in ending piracy, drugs, prostitution, and free speech.
So
Not going to happen.
how will governments fight against their capital control plans that they have, right?
So how will countries that are currently have currency controls will adapt, or they will not adapt. But Bitcoin happened, and there's no question of it unhappening. So that's what a supranational currency does, and that's why I'm saying reset your expectations, because the kind of accelerator it provides in times of crisis is incredible. If the 2008 crisis happened today, Bitcoin would be playing center stage across the world in the most massive capital flight you've ever seen. We've all ever seen. And as Argentina is teetering on the brink, sitting on top of a large, educated, literate, infrastructure-connected, electricity-connected, smartphone-owning population, they're about to jump ship. And when they do, it's going to be big. And you're going to see these little explosions happen across the world. China was first. India is following very closely behind because of serious problems with the rupee at the moment. Most of Latin America has been on this path for 30 years. What they didn't have is the Red Cross of currencies to parachute in and take them all the way to safety. Now they do. So under these circumstances, all you need is that tipping effect to occur in country after country after country. And it's not going to happen as a national adoption. No government is going to adopt Bitcoin. Okay, maybe Singapore. Maybe in 5, 10, 15 years, some country might be brave enough to decide, oh, fuck it, everybody's got Bitcoin anyway, might as well call it the currency, right? That's not how it's going to get adopted. How it's going to get adopted is that we are already making Bitcoin the currency of our country, the internet. That's the country that adopts it as a currency. What it means is that we can now have, as a country, the internet, we can have our own currency, and we can connect with everybody else in the world who has our own currency, and just ignore them. Just completely ignore them. And that's what's going to happen in my mind, which is you're going to see these communities of Bitcoin emerge in different countries in isolated pockets. A city here, 10% of the population there, etc. Some remittances, some capital flight, and overall that will bubble up until Bitcoin is a viable supranational currency, and then everything accelerates. Okay, let's see. Let's go here. Yes,
Sure. Well, I mean, everything you're saying sounds great, but I have to come back to the fact that it's in the survival interest of the United States government to kill this, strangle it in the cradle. And they have been successful in digital piracy, but they've done a pretty good job keeping it to a dull roar and trying. I mean, I read something they're going to have education in the elementary schools now.
About piracy?
They're trying to tie the concept
That's because they
to
already
moral
lost.
behavior.
You see, here's the thing. The reason piracy is dying today is because of Netflix. Because we have viable ways
Well,
of
I agree.
downloading
I agree.
content.
And
When we
Steve Jobs
didn't
started.
have viable ways of downloading content, we did it our own way. So what they did was they pivoted, co-opted, and gave consumers what they wanted, so consumers backed off piracy. That's what's happening.
I
They didn't
agree.
win a single battle. And certainly not
But look at the war on drugs, it's an instrument for social oppression, for lack of a better term. There's a huge community of people whose only job is to maintain that infrastructure.
Absolutely.
And they can do the same thing here.
Yeah.
And they can make it difficult. They can say, look, they can tie it to Silk Road, which they've tried to
Governments can
do.
get really, really nasty.
That's
And
true.
our government will get really, really nasty against certain people in the Bitcoin space, not the vast majority of people, but against certain people, they will get really, really nasty, and in the end, it will work. Because the bigger
It'll be
power
very bloody
here.
along the way, is what I'm saying.
Yes, but we're talking about a completely different scale. So my basic axiom is this. If you have a decentralized system and it competes against a centralized system, even with interference, and heavy interference, the decentralized system wins every time. Why? Because it delivers more value to every node in the network than a centralized system. Every time. In every decentralized system, that has been the case. So I'm not really worried. Because at the end of the day, what you don't realize is that as we fund Bitcoin, we defund the government. That's an important consideration. Yes. Actually, hang on, let me take some questions here. Someone has asked, yes.
About that balance in emerging markets. For example, in Mexico, I'm from Mexico, we receive a lot of remittances, and you're speaking about capitals flying away from Mexico. That also can be adopted by criminal groups, and that also can be
Criminals use money, yes.
yeah, and also the second option is create a domestic ecosystem. So my question is, what kind of analog offline forms of
great
Bitcoin
What kind of analog offline forms of Bitcoin can we use? So this is the key, which is that we cannot, I mentioned before, essential criteria for adoption, and how when those come together, you have this tipping point, which is looking for one precipitating event, one financial crisis, one change in government, one scare, one fascinating story to explode, right? So we can't wait for the world to up-tech to the level that Bitcoin is. It will, but we also need to down-tech Bitcoin to the level that the world is. And that means, among other things, using tamper-proof, unforgeable paper wallets that are traded at face value off blockchain. Essentially provide physical tokens of Bitcoin that are redeemable eventually, in theory,
That is already
on the
happening.
blockchain, but can be traded without electricity, without internet connectivity, face-to-face as a physical token. We are going to bootstrap a paper currency from Bitcoin, yes. We will have to, otherwise it's not going to work in many places where it matters.
For the sake of the argument, can I play devil's advocate on,
Please bring ahead.
on the opening argument you had that we really need to be concerned about Bitcoin neutrality
Yes.
and losing that? Now, I would like to ask, what about this whole fiasco with inputs.io and Trade Fortress and, you know, the idea of 4,100 Bitcoins being taken from quote-unquote secure wallet, the
Right.
idea that different actions like that in the past where there's an incentive for somebody to steal and there's a high incentive for them to get away with it, wouldn't the powers in place be trying to promote mechanisms that you state are actually killing Bitcoin neutrality? such
Yes,
as reverse-
Bitcoin neutrality killers are going to be coming wrapped up in a bow that says anti-theft measures on it. And you must look past that and recognize it for what it is. Unfortunately, it's actually pretty difficult to do. And you have to persuade the core developers to do it, and they understand that this is not the way to go. You basically have to invert the Bitcoin system from a credit push to a debit pull, and then you turn it into the dollar.
No, but that's not my point. My point is that, like, this act of more things being made to make Bitcoin different or improved upon, won't that in turn increase adoption or increase trust and cause, you know, more people to adopt it? The reverse, I would think that it seems like taking away Bitcoin neutrality would increase awareness and would increase trust globally. Like,
Yes, if we take away Bitcoin neutrality and turn it into PayPal, we've already seen that play out. We saw PayPal start out as a pure point-to-point, email-based, no hassle, no fuss payment system. And then in order to survive, they had to give up all of those principles until they became Visa. What we have to do in Bitcoin is learn from that and not allow it. Now, there's one good thing, which is because it's a distributed consensus system, you'd be hard-pressed to actually get enough people on board to that change. And here's the other thing. I'm not talking about the entire network being neutral. We don't need the entire network to be neutral. We only need the core protocol to be neutral. On top of that, do you want to build fascist coin? Do you want to build government coin? Do you want to build NSA coin? Go right ahead. And I will fight for the principle of neutrality that your NSA coin gets forwarded on the network. I won't buy any, but that's my personal choice. Yes?
So on the topic of neutrality, at the beginning of your talk, you said that we have to fight to keep Bitcoin neutral
Yes.
and to keep it like a
Yes.
protocol. But in the last half of your talk, you've been talking about how it's kind of unstoppable. What do you see as the consequences of people not fighting hard enough for neutrality?
What the consequences of people not fighting hard enough in neutrality is fragmentation. It's not that Bitcoin will be stopped, but that it will be fragmented into other coins that operate only within islands of control. So what it means is that in some places, in order to use Bitcoin, you're going to have to pass through the Great Wallet of China. And all of your transactions are going to go against the Great Ledger of China. And that's no longer a neutral protocol. And so the danger isn't that they're going to kill Bitcoin neutrality itself, but that they're going to fragment it into 1,000 coins that have varying levels of control.
I mean, doesn't fragmenting it kill a lot of the utility? Like,
Fragmenting it kills the utility for the fragments. Now, this brings up another important point. In 1984, I believe, Bob Metcalf said, the value of a network increases exponentially with the addition of each new node. Take that law and apply it to Bitcoin. And think carefully about what the value of the network is. If Metcalf is correct, the network effect on Bitcoin is the most powerful network effect we're ever going to see. Because it is a network effect that has actual value. And that value is instantly redeemable. And so if the addition of a node onto the Bitcoin network increases exponentially the value of that network, which is currently at what, 4.some billion, that has some very different implications than Bob Metcalfe ever thought. He was speaking metaphorically when he said the value. I don't think in Bitcoin it's metaphorical at all. So we need to realize the enormous power the network effect has in Bitcoin. I think altcoins are a very important part of the ecosystem because they are our testing lab. They are where we both develop new features and learn the worst possible outcomes of failure moves, like Terracoin ending up with an unsolvable difficulty, like first collapses that have happened in other altcoins, etc. So we learn the horrible lessons from the altcoins, but the chance of an altcoin unseating Bitcoin is vanishingly small. There is a chance, and I think it's very likely, that in the future we will have 193 national currencies and 4 to 5 supranational cryptocurrencies coexisting. Perhaps Bitcoin, perhaps another coin that's more transactionally rapid and is minted based on proof of stake of Bitcoin. I see Bitcoin becoming a reserve currency for other currencies to be built upon, as in this new currency is redeemable to the bearer for Bitcoin eventually, right? I see a world with 4 or 5 currencies, cryptocurrencies, because it's ridiculous to think that one is going to solve everybody's problems. That doesn't happen. But at the same time, the chance of a currency unseating Bitcoin is very slim. Bitcoin has to fail itself. It cannot be brought down by something better because the network effect is huge. Now, the corollary to that is you can ride the blockchain as a meta coin and take advantage of the entire network effect while creating a new layer. So, today we've seen a model where Bitcoin stands as one model and then others are forked at the same layer and made as parallel networks. Compare that to TCP/IP at the time was competing against ATM, token ring IP, and a bunch of other protocols that we don't remember anymore, right? What we need to do is make that exact same transition, which is accept that the core currency, the core blockchain has network effect, and then build other layers above it. So it's not about building the ATM protocol in competition to IP, it's about building the HTTP protocol on top of. That's what we're seeing with Mastercoin, that's what we're seeing with Invictus, that's what we're seeing with a lot of these coins that are coming along, ZeroCoin as well. They're riding the blockchain. So if you're a developer who's in an altcoin, you have a very difficult choice. You have to decide if you're going to take a plunge, fork off, and try to run alone, or if you're going to try and find a way to leverage the blockchain for network effect. I don't know if Scott has a time for this. There you go. Just keep going until people get bored. All right. Okay, questions? Yes, go ahead.
So, if we look at Bitcoin as a network, there are certain issues with TCP/IP in terms of directed denial of service attacks.
Yes.
Bitcoin has something similar called 51% attack. And
yes.
And a government has the capacity, and at least the wherewithal, to spend enough money to build enough machines to do a 51% attack and take something down.
Yes, people can do a 51% attack for a short period of time.
So,
not for a long period of time.
Not for a long period of time.
So here's the issue about this 51% attack. And the more recent one, which is selfish mining, which actually is a shortcut that allows you to execute a similar attack by not forwarding blocks, where you can execute it with perhaps 25, or even some have suggested down to 15% of the hashing power on the network would be sufficient with selfish mining to break it. There are 2 possibilities here. One, that miners who are already in the Bitcoin network decide this is a better way to make money. And 2, that someone who doesn't care about making money decides this is a good way to build a currency. Number 1 won't happen. And it won't happen because there is no scenario in game theory that where it makes sense to carve open the goose and take out the one egg, when you can just stick around, play the lottery, and get more eggs. And this applies to selfish mining as well. It has to be not selfish, but stupid mining.
It's number two that's the problem, right?
It's number two that's the problem. So for number two, the issue here is that in order to execute a hashing attack on the network, you would have to first procure the hashing equipment without anyone noticing. You would then have to deploy the hashing equipment without anyone noticing. And then you would have to turn it on and hope that nobody notices what you're trying to do, right? How long would that last? Here's the problem I have with the 51%. I'm not worried about the 51% attack. I'm worried about the 51% attack fix. Back to the point of network neutrality. Because the easiest way to fix a 51% attack is to say, hey, all of these IP addresses are DNSAs. Fuck them, let's filter them all. And if you do that, you just broke Bitcoin neutrality. You did it for a good cause, and it will come and bite you, but that's what just happened. So I'm much more worried about the fix than the underlying thing. Fortunately, the developers have been discussing this for a very long time, and their strategy is much more nuanced than that. But here's the bottom line. Pools of mining today are effective because we're still in that massive transition from CPU to ASIC mining. At some point when the vast majority of all miners have ASICs, the benefits of participating in a pool start diminishing, and the costs of participating in a pool are too high. So what we're going to start seeing, I think, is a reduction in the importance of pools and more fragmented approaches to mining. But again, here's the other big reason a 51% attack won't work is because you have to wait until the network stabilizes, and right now we're doing this, you know. So I go out and buy all the hashing gear to do a 51% attack, and by the time it's delivered, I've got myself a 5% attack, and I need to buy more gear.
You secure an Intel 14 nanometer fab.
Yes, of course, you secure a fab, you start printing and building and building and building.
You don't put it on until you want to, and then you take it off.
It's exactly, the reason a 51% attack is very difficult to pull off is exactly the same reason why, say, Warren Buffett can come along and basically buy a stock by dumping it and making it cheap. Because what happens is the actors' actions affect the market, which then affects the actors' actions. So if you go and start doing a 51% attack, the problem is you can't just do it in one go, right? You're going to turn it on. As you turn it on, you're going to drive the difficulty up. And pretty soon, you're competing against your own mind.
Right.
I mean, it's very difficult in practice to pull something like this off. And, you know, quite honestly, I'm not worried about it. It's a theoretical possibility. It provides for great computer science analysis. Okay. Yes?
So, we all know about the technological vulnerabilities, 51% attack, all these others. What I'm wondering more about is sort of the more sociological vulnerabilities. Because a lot of other currencies, stocks, we don't, like you said, we don't know how a cryptocurrency asset behaves, but I suspect it will be subject to the same problems as market cornering and, you know, other avenues of centralization that we've seen. So what potential or what risks of centralization do you see, as Sergey pointed out last week, for new cryptocurrencies?
So risk of centralization and kind of market effects that can damage a currency rather than technical effects, social effects, yes. Part of the reason I'm fairly confident about Bitcoin is that a lot of these market effects and manipulations depend on either scarcity of information or scarcity of access to the underlying system. So you either have to be 30 feet closer to the fiber drop, so you can get those 2 milliseconds, 2 nanoseconds of latency and get that high frequency trading in, or you have to be able to manipulate the market politically, for example, by ringing Libor, in order to really do market manipulation. The point is market manipulation works less and less and less the better the market works, because it actually takes that manipulation and turns it into market information and makes it obvious to everyone. So inefficient markets are easy to manipulate. Bitcoin is one of the most efficient markets we have because it consists of feedback loops that are almost instantaneous and completely public. We have never had a global transactional market as transparent, as efficient, and as clean as Bitcoin. Which, by the way, is why you can't make any money mining. So this is the bizarre thing. Mining is currently unprofitable, right? You look at that, what do you see? Do you see a broken market? I see a beautiful market. Because in an efficient market where you have very little differentiation among competing products, and the only competition you have is on price, or effectively, what you're willing to invest your ASIC mining equipment in. The profit margin you're able to extract in a market which is rapidly being saturated by new entrants rapidly approaches zero, right? And so in an efficient market, the early adopters make money, the middle adopters lose a bit, and the late adopters lose everything, effectively funding the early adopters. That's how an efficient market works. So the fact that mining is unprofitable right now is a very good indication that the Bitcoin market is working so tremendously efficiently that it is impossible to generate money from an activity that doesn't really generate that much value. Compare it to the 8% of GDP that the US financial industry extracts from the economy, producing an inferior, broken, and politically corrupt product. The only way that financial services can go in the 1990s from 4% of GDP to 8% of GDP today is through corruption. So those markets are being manipulated because they're not efficient. And so I'm very confident that efficient markets make that so obvious that it's much harder to do. Not impossible, just much harder. Let's see if there are any questions on this side. Okay, go on.
So I've heard people say that they want to calm down the Bitcoin volatility and introduce derivatives and all that. What do you see that is? Do you see that
calming down the Bitcoin volatility by introducing derivatives. I do think that that having better options capabilities and ability to do hedging, essentially for future risk, is a very important feature that we absolutely need. If I'm interested in using Bitcoin for a large value transaction, and it's not instantly now, but sometime in the future, hedging that risk is very difficult to do today, right? So if I'm buying an apartment in Argentina, and I have to sit on that money for 2 weeks, oh boy, am I in trouble. Bitcoin is not a very suitable currency to do that. So at that point, it would be really nice if I could get a spot price on a future market, the locked in a price sometime in the future, and of course that will reduce volatility. But I don't see volatility as a problem for 2 reasons. The first is that the volatility we experience today is an absolutely essential aspect of a nascent, tiny currency that is being adopted in growth spurts all around the world. I think of it as we're all in this little zodiac riding next to the US dollar Titanic. Sure, they have a smoother ride. We're bouncing up and down on the waves. But that's because we're in a zodiac. The important thing happens when they try to turn and can't, and we can. So the volatility we see in Bitcoin today is an expression of the frictionless nature of it, responding to growth spurts and adoption. And that's how it should be. I'm not worried. The other reason I'm not worried about it is because it only appears volatile to us. So ask an Argentinian if they think Bitcoin is volatile.
So part of the reason I asked about derivatives is that derivatives can also be used to manipulate a market and to make money off that manipulation.
Derivatives can be used to manipulate the market if you can restrict access to the market by distance or politics, right? So for example, in New York, one of the jobs I have done in the past, this is a network engineer, right? And the systems I worked on were high-frequency trading, low-latency systems connected to the New York Stock Exchange. The interesting thing is this has nothing to do with Wall Street. The only thing that matters is how far you are from 60 West Hudson, which is nowhere near Wall Street. It's like several, it's a couple of miles up north on Manhattan Island. Why? Because that's where the fiber hub that goes into the stock exchanges, right? So if you could get 2 cabinets away, and what they're doing now in these high-frequency trading environments is that if you're in a cabinet right next to it, and you're a cabinet across the room, you have the same fiber right. The guy who's right next to it has a coil of fiber on the floor. just to ensure that the latency is fair to within a nanosecond. Now, that's a good thing, because it stops that kind of manipulation. But high-frequency trading and derivatives can be manipulated primarily in markets that are not efficient. Are they going to create more volatility for Bitcoin in the short term? Sure. Absolutely. Take another question. Yes?
You see the fact that the Bitcoin is pseudonymous and not truly anonymous as a problem for adoption.
Is the fact that Bitcoin is anonymous or is not anonymous? Is pseudonymous, yes.
Not truly anonymous.
Yes. Bitcoin is not even close to being anonymous. Bitcoin is loosely pseudonymous.
Do you see that as a problem for adoption? For example, these Argentinians, let's say their government cracks down, they're trying to use it, then it's tracking down people because they can track them by tracking their Bitcoin transactions. Likewise, people probably don't like it when their neighbors can track, what they bought on Walmart.com or
Yeah, so anonymity on Bitcoin, that's a really important topic. Bitcoin is not anonymous. It's much, much worse than that. Bitcoin offers the false sense of anonymity without actual anonymity, which actually puts you in a very dangerous situation. Bitcoin is loosely pseudonymous, which means that if you follow perfect operational security, you may be able to hold your identity back from a non-determined, not well-funded adversary. So I would hazard we can learn from the internet when it comes to anonymity, security, and encryption is that what matters most is not what capability the power user has, but what capability is turned on by default for the average user. On the internet, we can see the parallel evolution of email encryption and web encryption as compelling arguments for that. Email encryption failed, and it failed not because we don't have the tools. I have PGP, I can send you encrypted email, you can send me encrypted email. Problem is, I also have a couple of master's degrees in computer science, and so I can't use PGP. On the web, however, what we have is that when you go to ebay.com, you get SSL. You get SSL whether you like it or not. In fact, you can't do it without SSL. You can't turn it off. You didn't make a choice as a user. That security is what I care about. So the issue of how we do security on Bitcoin and how we do anonymity of Bitcoin is not about building technologies that I, as a power user, or as an activist, or as a revolutionary, will try to use to evade my government. The issue is, I need to be hiding behind a wall of noise, and that wall of noise is every other user of Bitcoin doing a much smaller scale level of anonymity that ends up saturating the network with anonymity. So in order to be successful in protecting Bitcoin security, we need to have, for example, something like CoinJoin inside every client on by default until the addresses are relevant. It's not a coincidence that I'm saying we're living in the pre-DNS world. These addresses are, they're horrible, right? They're a geeky curse that is turning people off from adoption. However, the network protocol, the neutral protocol underneath, like IP addresses, is robust. What we need to do is build protocol layers above it, like Tor, right? That allow us to obfuscate the origin and destination of those addresses. CoinJoin is one of those projects. There's a bunch of others doing the same thing. And again, what's important is not what the power user does. What's important is what the everyday user does, because that's who the power user is going to hide behind. If I'm the only one encrypting on the network, they will come for me. It's as simple as that. If everyone's encrypting on the network, they have to come for everyone, and they don't anyway. So.
Do you see some of that code making into the core dev team code?
Do I see some of that code going into the core dev team?
Yeah. Useful, it needs to be used by pretty much everybody, right?
I think we are on the cusp of seeing the deprecation of the core client, and I would love to see that. Already they're making it modular. So here's the thing, Bitcoin D should never have had a wallet. You needed a wallet, it needed to have a wallet, but wallet should not be part of the core implementation. Wallets are an application. I'm much more interested in the Hive approach. So I don't want the core development team to make decisions like that. I want them to stick to keeping the core protocol neutral, fast, efficient, limber, and light. And then leave everything else for layers above it. That's how we make it successful, at least in my opinion. All right, let me take a couple more questions and I'll need to take a break.
Hi, I've been very interested in how you did all the way the countries or communities or places adopt Bitcoin. How do you actually define adoption?
So yeah, how do I define adoption? That's a really good question. I define adoption relatively conservatively. I define adoption as a point in which people are comfortable using Bitcoin, not in day-to-day spending, but at least for the exceptional circumstances where it's necessary. That's what I'm most interested in as a first step. Because quite honestly, I don't expect full adoption to happen as fast as I'd like it to happen. I am impatient when it comes to futurology. And so I've been on the internet since 1989. My mother joined the internet a year ago, only because I could give her an iPad that actually made it impossible to break it. Right? So how many years is that to full adoption? That's 14 years. And so when does my mother use Bitcoin? Probably not going to happen. When does my mother use Bitcoin for a real estate transaction? That's a different question. With my help, that's a different question, right? So that's what I'm thinking of adoption. Quite honestly, I think also Bitcoin is a generational thing. What we've done is we've taken a generation born on the internet, stolen all their jobs, destroyed their future, and given them Bitcoin. Uh-oh, just wait for it. I mean, this is where it's going to happen. It's going to be entirely a generational thing. Because if that generation adopts Bitcoin, the world has changed. And it doesn't matter if the rest of us do. And apparently my mother probably will never hear it. It's okay. They still don't know what I do for a living. All right, let me take one more question. All right, yeah, go ahead.
So, back to what you said about your mother finally adopting Bitcoin. A lot of people are kind of looking to, will end up looking to traditional financial institutions like banks to hold their Bitcoins in trust.
Absolutely.
I think we're moving a lot. I think that these kinds of things are going to, may end up having a great deal of control over how Bitcoin shapes up.
Yes.
Since people are using Coinbase instead of their own hosted wallets.
Right.
These aren't really things that
people are using Comcast to get on the internet.
Right.
And guess what? It fucked up the internet.
So,
and I remember a time when we were truly peer-to-peer. And we were doing peer routing.
This is what I mean by avenues towards centralization
yes.
that I think we face. What other avenues than simply trusted wallets do you see?
Well, I would like to tell you that, the moment Bitcoin was born, the banks started dying and just didn't know it. But the truth is that they're smart enough to pivot and co-opt Bitcoin like anybody's business. So I expect a few of those most heavily invested in either corrupt practices, unsustainable business models, or simply obsolete business models to suffer greatly and go buying the way of the dodo. Just like Columbia Records, just like Blockbuster. But guess what? The BDC didn't die. Time Warner didn't die. They managed to pivot, co-opt, adapt, and survive. And so Western Union is in deep trouble. They recently published a paper and they said, Bitcoin is not ready for prime time. I totally agree. When Bitcoin is ready for prime time, the question you will ask is, Western who? Western Union is going to go the way of Blockbuster unless they pivot very hard, very soon. But Bank of America and Citibank, no, they're going to co-opt, adapt, they're going to offer fractional reserve Bitcoin banking, fully secured and reversible, probably with insurance schemes. The important question is, will they be able to change the underlying protocol? Because as much as Comcast popped up the internet, they didn't manage to break the core net neutrality, not completely. And do you know why I know that? Because Bitcoin happened. Bitcoin is proof that the internet is still able to provide innovation without permission at the ends. And if we can maintain that one more layer of protocols up, now in the internet of money, and maintain that core principle of neutrality of innovation without permission, innovation at the edges, then they can go out all they want, but fundamentally, they will be playing on our turf, and that's what changes everything. Okay, thank you very much.